So, Will, I've got to know, have you forgiven Ali yet for what he did to your team last week?
I'm not gonna lie to you, Greg. I don't know if I'll ever forgive Ali for what he did to my team, because not only did he waste my chip, but then he put the wrong constructors in, knowing that I'm a Ferrari fan, and he decided, oh, let's go full Merc. And I was like,
That excites me. I'm a big Merc guy, but I can see why that would be a rough landing for you.
yeah,
Totally understand.
yeah. I
But
mean,
before we get too far ahead of ourselves, whoa. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's introduce ourselves to the people. I'm Adam from F1FantasyHQ.com. I'm joined here by Will from FanAmp. Thank you for coming back to the Fantasy Formula episode 3.
Yeah, for those who don't know, I'm a new fantasy player, and Adam here is a pro. So he's kind of guiding me through this season. Unfortunately, I was sick last week, so I wasn't able to be on that episode. But sorry about that. I'm back now. I'm a long-time F1 fan, but I'm new to fantasy, so this is a whole journey for me. And my goal is to do as best as I can with Adam coaching me. Adam, take it away.
All right, let's fire it up with a recap from the Austrian Grand Prix. First, Max and Checo, they had a fantastic day for me with a 3x DRS boost. We're going to talk all about how that played out for those of you that followed my advice from the show last week. Next up, Ferrari and how they were a part of the best limitless team. And we'll walk Will through what his team could have and should have looked like if he wanted to get the most out of the limitless chip. In the 3 spot, Lando and those new upgrades looking really sharp. We'll talk about what that means for him looking ahead to next week and review a really, really good day for Lando. 4th, we're going to talk about a surprise lead budget driver in Logan Sergeant and how he got all the points that he did in Austria. And last but not least, this wouldn't be an Austria review if we didn't talk about all of those late penalties. And we're going to zoom in specifically on how it impacted fantasy scores in the late night on Sunday. Yeah. Will, what did you think about the race?
It was a great race. It was really exciting. The track limits thing was kind of annoying at first, but then it just kind of started being funny. I thought I was kind of laughing every time I saw a lap time to get deleted. I was like, after your 4th lap time gets deleted, maybe you try something different. But that's just me, The radios were hilarious. I mean, I heard radios of Lando narking on Lewis during the race, which is really, really funny. The weather was pretty decent. I mean, there was a little bit of variability, so it was kind of interesting in that sense, not too effective on the race. And I like the sprints. So sprints are a really cool race format, in my opinion. I enjoy them. There's more chance I just like more racing. So if we have an extra race and an extra quali in one weekend, why would you say no to that? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. And I like that we had a sprint weekend with different weather each day. So it wasn't just a copy paste of the same strategy from Saturday to Sunday. They really had to earn it both days. Made for a great day.
Yeah.
All right. Let's start with our first topic, Max and Checo. So for those of you that watched the show last week, you saw that I made my boldest move of the season by playing the 3x DRS boost on Verstappen. And that freed up the 2x boost for Sergio Perez. It ended up being a huge day for Verstappen. He qualified P1, he won the sprint, and he won the Grand Prix. And he also won the fastest lap by pulling off maybe the most arrogant move we're going to see in F1 all season. By defying team orders, he pitted for softs, and he stole that fastest lap point from his own teammate. So, interesting day for Verstappen, but he pulled off 168 points with the 3x boost. So a really, really fantastic day. That was the 4th highest fantasy output of any driver in any race this season. So really, really awesome decision for those of us that played that boost.
Yeah, great race. I was a little peeved at the fact he boxed while ahead to put on softs to then try and go for a fastest lap. I mean, I get it. You're good. Okay, we know. But don't shove it in our faces like that. I mean, I'm like number 1 Max Verstappen hater, honestly, because I'm a Ferrari fan. And I don't know. I just don't like the kid. But that's just me. You know what I mean? He's a great driver. I'm not going to take anything away from him. He's awesome. He's amazing. He's a generational talent, whatever you want to call him. I just don't like him personally. But
think about it this way, though. If he got one of those post-race penalties, A 5-second penalty means he only beat Leclerc by 0.1 seconds. That's less than the width of a tire. If he got 2 5-second penalties, you got a new race winner. So it really could have made a difference had he gotten some of those penalties.
Right. Well, the way the penalties are dished out, he would have had to go over track limits about 4 times to get a 5-second penalty, which I don't think was going to happen, unfortunately, for us and for Leclerc. But there was one kind of interesting part of this weekend is that Checo was kind of giving Max a run for his money during the sprint. I mean, not during the race itself, but they were battling out in the sprint, which was pretty fun to watch.
And I think deep down that might be why Max did that late pit, almost to give Checo a little bit of his own medicine on Sunday. But Checo had a really good fantasy outing this week too. He started a little bit low in qualified P15, but then he gained 12 points, 12 positions during the race, which was 12 points. He had 15 overtakes. And all in all, that P3 finish, he had 102 fantasy points for those of us that dropped the 2x chip on him. So even though his qualifying form hasn't been where Red Bull would like it, it's really falling right into our hands as fantasy players.
Yeah, I mean he's making a good case for him to. After a couple of hard weeks, even fantasy wise, he's making a good case for him to continue being the second best driver in the game. Honestly, now, unfortunately, thanks to my good friend Ollie, I didn't get to play the 3x boost on Verstappen, and so I had the 2x on him, and then I had Limitless, which didn't turn out well for me, as many of you probably know. But your team played the 3x DRS boost on Verstappen, and my team did not keep up at all. I mean, this was my team, I believe. Yeah.
Well, it's what the best team would have looked like if Ali had given you just a little more love. So your team with the Limitless chip, it wasn't half bad. You just needed a little bit more Ferrari in there.
A little bit more Ferrari. I would have put a little bit more Ferrari in there, but who knows?
And I'll tell you what you already knew, Will. It was a great result from Leclerc, P2 on that upgraded Ferrari, and he did it despite the usual hijinks from Ferrari. You had the communication delay on Saturday that led to the impeding penalty. On Sunday, there was the double stack pit that didn't go well for Leclerc or for Sainz, but great team effort from Sainz. Leclerc with a strong P2 finish. And he ended up scoring 32 fantasy points, which put him squarely in the best lineup for the Limitless chip.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have him. No, I agree.
Part
of the reason Leclerc did so well this week is because he was running upgrades, right? I mean, they seem to be working pretty well. I mean, honestly, I wasn't expecting so much even from my own team, and I'm a Ferrari fan, so it's like, wow, I mean, got me excited a little bit.
They look really good.
Yeah, I mean, they looked really good. Also, Lando did really well this weekend. P4, he's really good in Austria. I'm sure you know. What am I saying? Yeah, you know. And he was pretty comical on the radio as well with the papaya message. I thought that was funny.
There's a lot to talk about with Lando from this week. So it was another great Austrian Grand Prix for Lando. He's never finished lower than 7th in this race, and his P4 finish is his best finish, not only at the Austrian Grand Prix, but his best finish in the 2023 season. So great outing from Lando. It's been a tough fantasy season for Lando. He still ranks 17th in points per million, and only 17% of all teams ran Lando in Austria. So not a very popular fantasy choice, but he came through for everyone. With that P4 finish and the driver of the day, and that's the nod to the Papaya fans radio message, he had a 29-point outcome, which is his best finish of the season. So kudos to the 17% of teams that started Lando.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to keep an eye on especially because Piastri is getting upgrades in Silverstone this week. So I think we need to keep an eye on him and maybe think about putting him in the lineup if we're looking for something crazy and a better result. I mean, it's going to be interesting, though.
Yeah, and I heard, too, that McLaren is only released half of their upgrades to Lando, and there'll be another 25% coming in 2 of the next 3 races. So it could get even better for Norris in the next month or so.
Yeah. Do you know how much they're going to give Piastri at Silverstone? Is it going to be the same as Lando's last race, or are they going to be even cars?
I think they're catching Piastri up to Austria Lando.
Okay. Good to know. All right. So
let's move on now to our surprise budget driver of the week. This is a guy we never see in this space in Logan Sergeant. He had 12 overtakes and a whopping 19 fantasy points. It's his highest score of the season. It's the highest scoring budget driver of the week. And for those of us that played the 3x DRS boost, Sargent was part of the very best team. So there are only 100 or so teams in the whole world that thought to play Sargent, but it was quite the play this week.
Oh yeah, I saw the number one team on fantasy included Sargent with the 3x boost on Verstappen and 2x on Perez. So that was the highest scoring team this week. But not like Williams kind of popping off is what I'm going to say, because not only did Sargent do really well, but also Albon, who finished P11 and had a great race. And it's kind of speaking to those upgrades that Williams are making. And it's very interesting because we haven't seen Williams be this competitive in a while.
It's awesome news. And Albon finished 11th, like you said. He reached Q3 for the second race in a row. This is the first time since 2021 that a Williams driver has featured in Q3 in back-to-back races. And on the fantasy side, he finished with 11 points. A perfectly fine day and 2 races in a row where he's starting to look like a viable driver. So definitely on the radar for us over the next few races.
So what do you think about Sargent? Do you think putting him in is a risk we can take or a risk we shouldn't take?
I think it depends ultimately on what your budget looks like. If you have just that little bit of budget left and you're between those bottom drivers, Sargent, De Vries, Hulkenberg, I think Sargent clearly has the best upside now because he's in that upgraded Williams. Their livery for this weekend with their 800th career race looks amazing.
Oh yeah,
I would definitely trust Sargent over those other bottom 2 drivers.
But in comparison to like Zhou and maybe Yuki, what do you think? I mean, he's a lot cheaper, is all I'm saying.
If it allows you to get an even safer driver number 3 or 4, maybe. But as you know, I've got a bit of an affinity for Zhou. He's so safe. He scored the most points of any budget driver. So I think you might find Zhou in my lineup this week.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Anyways, we can't talk about Austria without talking about all these damn track limits. And let's be specific, all these penalties that came during and after the race. You want to give us what you got on that?
I'm just taking a minute to consume this Ocon picture. Where did you find this?
It's pretty funny, bro. It wasn't me. That was our production team. Shout out Ali. That's pretty good.
Did he just watch the notebook before he took this picture? My goodness. But, so the FIA after the race, they reviewed over 1,200 individual points throughout the race where a driver may have exceeded track limits. There were 12 penalties in all. Ocon obviously receiving the most penalties, 30 seconds of total time added to him. It's something that the FIA is going to have to fix before the 2024 running of the Austrian Grand Prix. And they just announced that Austria is on the calendar through 2030. So they've got to figure this out, and they've got to figure it out by the latest next year.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but we do have a question. Okay. So the question is, do you think Sargent holds up now that McLaren has upgrades for Piastri?
I think, one of my big tricks when you hear that multiple drivers are running upgrades, you've got the Williams, McLaren, you've got Ferrari that are fine-tuning their upgrades from last week, Mercedes rolling out a big package, Alpine rolling out a big package. Let's just see some of that free practice data. I think it's really going to start to come out if those upgrades are working, particularly in FP2 and FP3. So I'm going to keep my eyes tuned to those free practice sessions.
Yeah. So fantasy points changed a lot after the penalties. Sainz lost 2. Ocon only lost 2 points, even though he had 30 seconds of penalties, which is kind of nuts. But you barely missed on having the perfect lineup.
I did. Let's go into our lineup review here because this was it's a time for me to give myself a little pat on the back here. My lineup was 161st in the world out of 2 million teams. So if you watched the fantasy formula last week, you ran this lineup, you finished in the top 0.005% in the whole world. Really, really good feeling for myself and those that watch the show. And you can see here, Max and Checo, we talked about them earlier, had a great race. Alonso and Stroll Both benefited from those late penalties. They gained positions after those late track limits penalties were assessed. Even Joe had a perfectly decent weekend, just a lot of overtakes, didn't finish particularly high, but didn't DNF. And all in all, a really good showing for my team.
Yeah,
Gained over 110,000 places worldwide in my ranking just
really.
for this lineup. So very, very cool week.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sure my ranking went way down, but thanks, Ollie. Uh, it was still a decent lineup at the end of the day. I mean, you can't always get with the best. You know what I mean? No one can predict the future. Would have been better with a little bit of Ferrari sprinkled in there, which I would have done. But yeah, let's talk about the limitless chip actually, because I know you wrote articles on all of the chips.
I did. And I think the biggest thing we should talk about with the limitless chip, because we get asked this a lot, when prices change at the end of a race weekend, which assets get that price change? And what we found was it's your previous team that gets the price changes. So in Will's case, the lineup you see on the right reverted back to his Canada lineup, and then any driver price increases or decreases were applied at that point. So you did catch some of those increases, but it wasn't to this team.
Yeah, no, I agree. We also have, before we move on, because I think we're pretty much done recapping Austria, and we're going to move on to Silverstone. But we have a question. So, Adam, what's the best you've ever finished in world rankings for the week?
In the week, I think this is the best I've ever finished in a single week. Even last year, I finished 898 in the world on the year. And I think it was just consistently having really good teams week in and week out. I don't think I've ever had a week quite this good. So I've been tooting my own horn all over Twitter, all over Reddit, and right here too.
Nice. Congrats. All right. So now that you've got your ego boosted, let's move on to Silverstone so we can bring it back down.
Now that I've finished my own victory lap, we're going to talk on some really important things as we look ahead to Silverstone and the British Grand Prix this weekend. And I want to talk about the DNF history of this track because it's higher than I would have given it credit for, and I want to share that data with all of you. Pirelli recently released their tire strategy for this weekend, and there's some things that we haven't seen through the first 10 races of the year that I want to get into with you all. We're going to dig into some of those upgrades a bit more and what to expect from a fantasy standpoint. And then lastly, that all-important recent weather update and what that could mean for some of the strategies.
Yeah, speaking just at a higher level, I mean, Silverstone is where the most DNFs happen statistically in the entire calendar. Not to mention Joe's crash last year, which was super scary to watch. So glad he's okay. Don't know how. Those cars are built like tanks now, but crazy crash. You know, heart leaps into your throat when you see something like that. But keeping in mind that it's also going to be a wet weather weekend from as of right now, what do you think that means in terms of fantasy prospects?
Well, I think this could be a weekend to look at the no negative chip because as a reminder, that's going to prevent any drivers from scoring less than 0 points on the weekend. If you see these two facts together, high DNF rate in 2022, wet weather, and you think multiple drivers might not finish the race, it would be a great time to use that chip. And you can see which drivers have 2 DNFs this year. Some very popular ones. You have Stroll, who's in the meta lineup for most people. You have a surging Leclerc coming off a P2 last week. And you have Albon and his back-to-back Q3 appearances. So some very popular drivers also lead all drivers in DNFs. And then on the right, you can see the odds checker data for which constructor they think will retire first. It's Williams. So be very careful, those of you that are running either Albon or trying your hand as Sergeant this week.
Sorry about that. But yeah, it's a week where you got to be a little bit careful. You got to be a little bit more cautious, I think, than most other weeks just because of the history related to this track. So Pirelli also released a report on the tires for this week, and it's the first time we're going to see the hardest compound this year.
That's right. So the C1 is making its season debut this week, and you can see in the top right corner that tire stress is at the absolute max number. This tells me that they're expecting a multi-stop race, 2, maybe 3 stops. This tells me that you should keep an eye on these drivers that tend to burn through tires quicker than the rest of the pack. And recently, Nico Hulkenberg, we've talked about all the positions he's lost in the last few races. A lot of that's because he's burning through his tires quickly, having to pit sooner. And I think this race is going to be very challenging for him. And then Leclerc, you see him with his head in his hands here. Before last week, he was also another guy that was pitting a little bit early because Ferrari was having some issues with controlling the degradation on the tires. So keep an eye out for those two. I would knock them down a peg as we look at this week.
I will say, though, apparently the new upgrades are huge in terms of tire regulation for the Ferrari, though. That's at least what I've read. I don't know exactly how much of a difference that's going to make during the race. But I also wanted to think about the fact that if it does become a wet weather race, this whole, this whole like super hard tire compound thing kind of goes out the window because people are going to go on inters. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, especially as the weekend continues and we get closer to race day.
That makes a lot of sense. Again, it just all goes back to this theme of waiting till we get closer to the race to see if the weather forecast evolves at all and how these drivers are doing on this track with these tires and with some of these new upgrades that they're rolling out.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to some of these upgrades. We were just talking about it a second ago. Will, which upgrades are you looking forward to the most as we look ahead to Silverstone?
So from what I can tell, the Williams upgrades are pretty much fully in stock, fully on the car now. Mercedes is supposed to be coming with a huge package. I've heard it's pretty significant. So I think it's really important to keep an eye on that and kind of see. I wouldn't necessarily put Lewis or Lewis just because of or George in my lineup personally, just because of their high price and their high PPM. I mean, low PPM, sorry. And but I'm really interested to see what they can do. I mean, if Spain is any indication of what a Mercedes upgrade can do in terms of race pace, then I'm excited to watch this race. That's for sure. I'm really interested to watch Piastri in a more decent car than he has been all year. I mean, Lando got P4 with some upgrades, and Piastri's about to have it. And Piastri hasn't been driving badly this year in terms of overall racecraft and race pace. He's even fought with Lando on multiple occasions, one time getting a crazy overtake in Canada. I don't know if you saw that, where he just squeezed in through the margin during the chicane. But also Williams is bringing their upgrades, especially to Sergeant. So I don't know what percentage of upgrade package they had fully brought to Sergeant in Austria, but I think it's important to keep an eye on them for this week and the next in terms of putting them in our lineups.
There's a lot to look forward to. Obviously, as a Mercedes fan, I'm looking forward to their upgrades. After that really spicy team radio from Toto Wolff last week, there's some pressure on Lewis and George to succeed this week, but the stats do back them up. So Hamilton leads all drivers in Silverstone wins with 8, and British drivers have 3 times the number of wins and podiums at this track than any other nationality. So this definitely lends itself to a good day for George, Lewis, and Lando. I'm expecting a solid day on track for Mercedes, but I agree with you, Will. Their PPM is still a little bit too low for me to invest in them right away. Let's see some contention for podiums before I invest in Mercedes.
Yeah.
Now, you had hinted a minute ago at some of those Williams upgrades, and I want to break them down a little bit more. You can see on the left, this is a chart from the really great insights over at Formula Data Analysis. And the left column is the top speed reached by each driver in the race. And you can see that's 2 Williams that are highlighted in the top 10 cars for fastest speed. And he published this same data after the sprint. Williams were 1 and 2 on the whole grid. And so this tells me a few things. One is that when they're in a straight line, they're going to go really fast. So avoiding being caught by other drivers and overtaken. It also means when they have the DRS open, they should be able to overtake at will. And I think this means you'll be seeing the Williams moving up the field more than it has in the first 40% or so of the season.
Yeah. Also, Silverstone is a track where there's a lot of straight line speed is a necessity at this track. I mean, there's a lot of fast corners, and there's a couple straights. Yeah, they got the Hamilton straight and the hanger. But yeah, it's gonna be interesting to watch. I mean, I'm excited. I'm thinking. I mean, this is a hot take right now. I'm gonna shoot something out right here. I'm thinking Williams finishes in the points this week.
That's not crazy at all. Albon's been nibbling at it the last few weeks. If he can fend off a DRS train, I don't think it's crazy at all.
I also think that Albon performs really well in the wet. So if it rains, I think that chance shoots up as well.
It's a great point. Sargent actually just climbed from P20 to P19 in the driver's standing. So his arrow's moving up.
He's on his way up. He's on his way up. He'll be champ. He'll be champ by the end of the year.
Exactly. Look out for Verstappen.
Yeah.
And you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, looking at some of those McLaren upgrades. Will, you touched on it a moment ago. Piastri's been looking really solid lately. Even without those upgrades, he had the 10th most fantasy points in Austria. And we saw, even going back to Monaco, he has really strong performance in wet conditions. So Piastri in an upgraded car in wet conditions, not a crazy idea to sub Lance Stroll out for Piastri if that free practice data gives you good reason to.
Yeah. No, but Lando's a little expensive right now. But Piastri, he's cheaper. I could see some people flipping him into their lineup if they want to take that risk.
Absolutely. And to put it in perspective, I mentioned a minute ago that Piastri is in line with Stroll as far as cost. You'd have to replace Alonso, who's the third best asset in the whole game for Lando. I just can't justify it at this point.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I would agree. Not only do Williams and McLaren bring upgrade, but also Alpine, which is something we haven't seen all season and something they desperately need to climb back into the top of the table.
Absolutely. Obviously Ocon wants to rebound after all those penalties late in the race. And then there was some sound from Gasly after the race where they asked him about the McLaren updates, and he said it means big trouble for us. We need to catch up. We need to get it right. So a lot of pressure on those Alpine engineers to get these upgrades just right so they can compete in that upper midfield.
Yeah, that battle in the battle of fourth in the constructors is heating up right now. I mean, I think if Alpine, we said that McLaren hasn't even pulled out all their upgrades, right? They're not even all in the car.
Right.
So depending on how this week goes for Alpine and how those upgrades look, I don't know what percentage they're going to bring to the track this week, but it could be interesting.
And I think back to our first episode, Will, we shared this quote from Mika Hakkinen where he predicts that McLaren's going to be right up there with Red Bull by the end of the season. So he's seen these upgrades and he's very confident in them. So keep that in the back of your mind.
Lando looked fast, is all I'm saying.
Sure did.
All right. How about we move on to the weather, or at least the weather that we know as of right now, what we predict. Not me. I'm not a meteorologist.
Yeah, we'll put our weekly weatherman hat on. And so it looks like a dry Grand Prix, but perhaps a wet Saturday. So a wet Saturday means you could have some surprises in qualifying.
Another win in Q2 for Albon, maybe?
Maybe. And I think this is a great time to look out for that final fix chip. If you have a front runner, maybe a Leclerc, a Lando, a Carlos Sainz, someone who's not typically in your lineup, but they get stuck by the rain, qualify really low, they may be able to make up a ton of positions on Sunday. That's the kind of candidate you want for the final fix.
Yeah.
Sunday's looking clear, so knock on wood, should just be a regular race. But if that forecast shifts, it could mean a really interesting day for everybody.
So we actually have a question very similar to what you just responded to. But if it rains, how does that change your lineup specifically before locking? Do you think you would make a change, or how do you feel?
Not in terms of who I put in my lineup, but I think rain, depending on how likely it is to rain and how heavy, that might push me to drop the no negative chip. I'm trying to balance, do I use the chips whenever I think is best? Do I try to spread them out through the year? So we'll see if it's light rain or heavy rain, because typically the no negative chip makes the most sense at the very wet tracks, like a Spa. Singapore was a very wet race last year.
Suzuka.
Sometime where there's going to be mayhem.
Yeah. Oh, we have another question, actually. So if you use the no negative chip, can you also use the final fix?
Unfortunately, you can't. It's only one chip per team per race weekend.
Okay, good to know.
That's something that could be cool for next year is if you stack them and make a super team. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, exactly. You put limitless and triple on the same weekend.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Will's going to score 1,000 points in 1 week.
Yeah. So now that we're done with the weather, I think we should move on to our FanAmp picks of the week.
Let's do it.
Right. You want to read them out for me?
Sure. So the first one is, will Alex Albon make it to Q3 for the third weekend in a row? What do you think, Will?
I love Albon, man. I love Albon. And those upgrades look good. And with the rain supposedly coming on Saturday, still not confirmed, Albon's really good in the rain. I think he can do it. I'm gonna say yes. I'm gonna say yes, he makes Q3.
I'm going to say no, and I'll give you a little hot take to go with it. I think both McLarens make Q3, and that's the difference between Albon making it or not. I think he's going to just fall off.
You think so? I don't know, man.
I liked him in the rain.
Alex, man.
I like him in the rain.
Man, Alex. I love that guy.
Let's look at question number 2. Is Williams the first team to DNF?
So, because of how they've been performing recently, and I know Sergeant had a DNF a couple weeks ago, but I honestly think they don't DNF. Albon's really good in the rain, so even if it does rain, I don't think he has any problems. The only problem I can see them with the DNF is if they have a mechanical failure of some sort, brakes, engine, whatever it be. And I don't see Sergeant crashing into the wall either, really. I mean, that's not really – he hasn't shown that that's what he does. I think it's much more likely that AlphaTauri is the first to retire because I don't trust Nick DeVries with anything.
No, and I actually agree with you. Williams, I don't think will be the first team to DNF. I suspect there's going to be a crash somewhere in the midfield, and that will be the difference between who DNFs first. I think that will be someone a little bit higher than Williams.
Yeah.
All right.
At least
are you ready to pick a team?
I'm ready to pick a team.
All right.
Here, let me share my screen. All right, so this is my team. Oh, give it a second. There we go.
All right. So you're back to your post-Canada team. You can see some of those price updates there. Now, who are you going to roll with?
I'm thinking. I just want to tinker. I'm going to tinker a little bit. I want to see who. If I take Logan Sergeant, because I'm feeling strong about Sergeant. Who else can I take? Can I take someone ahead? I still end up with Joe. Dang, I really don't got money.
As the season goes on, what we'll shift to are some strategies to gain cost cap to allow you to afford better drivers. How do we get that balance between scoring the most points now and setting your cost cap up so that you can score more points later?
Yeah, I understand. The only problem is it's really demoralizing when I can't pick anyone. But yeah, I think I'm just going to go with Yuki. I think I'm going to stick with my lineup from Canada. I really like Yuki as a driver. Fernando's going to be good. He's probably the best PPM in fantasy right now still, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yes, still has the best PPM.
Yeah.
And for those of you that haven't seen my team through my articles or my Twitter, I have the exact same lineup, but instead of Yuki, I have Lance Stroll because I've been playing full season and I have a little bit more cost cap. And a fun Lance Stroll fact for you, Will. Lance just passed Jacques Villeneuve for the most F1 career points scored by a Canadian driver.
Really?
So, Lance, you're in this week.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that. I wouldn't have thought he would have passed that already. Yeah.
There you go.
I guess Jack didn't race for a ton of seasons, right?
That's true. Yeah, he had a relatively short career. He had some really high points in it.
I mean, he had some. He was really strong. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't very long. Which is
a quick point I want to make before we move off of the lineup build for this week. If you ran the 3x DRS boost last week, your 2x chip is still sitting on Sergio Perez. You want to put it back on Verstappen if you're going to set and forget your lineup from last week. So don't let it just play out.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
All right.
Oh.
Will, any other questions before we go this week?
No, I don't have any questions for you. We do have one last question from the audience. Thoughts on Hülkenberg?
I am so out on Hulkenberg. And, just to carry the theme of the last few weeks, he leads all drivers in positions lost, tends to qualify high and drop off during the race. He does this because he typically burns through his tires faster than the rest of the grid. This is a track with high degradation, and I suspect it's going to catch up with him early. And then you saw the reliability issues of the Haas end his day early last week. I'm out on Hulkenberg. If you can afford him, you can afford Sargent. Go with Sargent.
I think that's fair. Personally, I'm not a big fan of Hulkenberg. I love not him as a person. I love the guy. Don't get me wrong. Hulkenberg, don't come after me. Yeah, but as a driver, he qualifies really well. But like you said, he doesn't have the race pace right now. Or more specifically, I think it's the Haas that doesn't have the race pace, because his qualifying times are insane for what he's driving. Compare him and K-Mag. K-Mag's race pace is arguably better because he gains positions rather than loses them normally. But he's just being out qualified by Hulkenberg pretty much every race, which is crazy. Yeah. But he's losing some positions viable.
I think it's mostly because K-Mag's protecting the tires and he's hanging out there a little bit longer. Obviously, bad luck with the engine failure last week from Hulkenberg, but it seems like Magnussen is a little bit slower in qualifying, but he plays the long game. He continues to have these weird battles with De Vries at the end of races. So I hope that's a trilogy this weekend.
Yeah. Well, if you're battling with De Vries, that means if you're battling with an AlphaTauri in general, it probably means
it's not a good sign.
You need to work on your upgrades a little bit. You spend some time in the wind tunnel. But yeah, I'm Will. This is Adam. This is Adam. Thank you guys so much for coming to watch the Fantasy Formula. Go check out Adam on his, I do this every time, on his socials, website, everything, Twitter, Reddit, Insta. He makes great articles and they're really, really informative. If you don't have time to watch the show, maybe go read his reviews and his previews, and that'll help you out.
Thanks, Will. And by all means, feel free to check me out in my FanAmp community. The link and QR code are below. I'll be answering questions about you and your lineups all the way up till the lock deadline on Saturday. Will, good luck to you this week. I'm hoping for big things for you.
Thank you. I'm going to need the luck after last week. As you can tell, I'm obviously over it already. But yeah, go check out FanAmp on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, Twitter, anything else you can find us on. Thanks for all the love. Thanks for all the questions. Thanks for coming. Have a good night.
Will, we'll see you next time.
All right.